talk about walking in the room and labeling light off, light on, so that the child visually sees the light going off and on, and then you're talking about labeling that activity. And then as every chance you have, you want to connect language to imagery.
Up through age 5 or so, from about 2 to 5, we start working on the preschool language concepts that kids need for school. So we're working with children. Children are learning in the environment colors and shapes and objects and numbers and people in the environment. In the 5 to 7 period, when they're starting school, they're learning more about word concepts that go with numerical concepts. So one and many, less and more, few and many, first and last. Go to the front of the line, go to the back of the line, in front of, in back of, behind. Okay, we use children's books a lot to teach those kinds of concepts. With prepositions, we tend to use whole body things. So we'll start out with prepositions on the playground because it's very easy to show under and through and on top of when the child is doing it actually, or when then you would progress to moving a toy puppet or a stuffed animal through those things and having the child observe it. Okay, and then you progress to actually using the concepts.
It's also good to categorize. So this is hot, and then this is cold, and contrast. So you want to try to teach things in categories like dogs, cats, mice, animals. These are obvious things. But at the same time, remember this, that perception is a matter of contrast. So you know what something is often because you know what something isn't. The bottom line is to think that you want to communicate as much as possible. You want to label what you're communicating about. You want to have contrast within that. And you want to, at every moment, try to connect the child to the experience, the sensory experience, with some sort of language, whether it's sign language or verbal language.
Youngsters with Down syndrome are likely to need more repetitions before the words are really properly learned. Any child has to hear you say, oh look, here's the cat, many times before they realise that's the cat, that's the dog, this is a hat. The typical child probably hears words used in a context where they can see what you mean many times before they really understand them and can use them. We know that the children usually are understanding quite a lot more than they can use. So in building up their vocabulary, we would keep a record of what they understand and be adding new words to that vocabulary. And then from words they already understand but are not yet saying, we'd be trying to get them to use those in production. So we'd have a quite focused view of taking spoken language forward, and hopefully most people are getting help from a speech and language therapist. In this whole age period of 2 to 7, at 2 to 3 to 4, we're probably focusing most on learning new vocabulary and then beginning to be able to string 2, 3, 4 key words together. But by the time we're 4-ish, the issue of learning the grammar for sentences emerges. And we know, again from research, that you don't get grammatical expressions used, even things like a plural S or a possessive S or an ing ending, until the children are using at least about 200 words in their spoken language. So we do keep a quite careful record of the total amount of vocabulary this child is trying to use.
We move from combining 2 words to combining 3 words. In combining the 2 and 3 words, children start to learn relationships between words and the basis of syntax or grammar of the language and morphology or word parts of the language. So kids begin to learn the concept of daddy, shoe, okay, and then the structure that you need. Daddy's shoes, okay, daddy's big shoes, mommy's red shoes, okay, and combine them. And as they combine them, it's going to start with mommy's shoe, but then it'll become mommy's shoe, mommy's shoes, mommy's red shoes. Kids move ahead and learn those structures.
The evidence would suggest that the brain is most ready to learn language in the first 5 or 6 years. most children are going to pick up their first language, if not more than one language, very readily at that time. We don't know whether brain development is on a different timetable for children with Down syndrome. We don't know whether that window when they're most sensitive to language learning is longer. Since we don't know, we tend to work on the principle we really ought to be practicing some of the grammatical rules, the rule-driven language, by the time we're 4, 5 and 6, even if we're only practicing it by imitating short sentences with other people.
What is understandable speech? How do we measure understandable speech? Speech intelligibility, the idea of speech being understandable, is a general term. And so sometimes I'll see IEPs that say, we're working on speech intelligibility. Well, you can't work on speech intelligibility. You can't work on understandability. But at this point, we know a lot about what affects understandability. And we can work on each of the factors that impact on intelligibility and ultimately improve your child's speech intelligibility. Now, what are these factors? Well, we know there are anatomical factors, including the mid part of the face. If we look at the mid part of the face, it tends to be underdeveloped and see a slightly flattened profile. Well, part of that is the relationship between the upper jaw and the lower jaw. So anatomically, it's going to be more difficult for the child to keep the tongue in the mouth because the tongue is average size, the housing is smaller. Okay? Another example, we know that children with Down syndrome anatomically often have a higher, narrower palate. Okay? And for some sounds, the child has to bring the tongue up in the back for the k and the g sound. Okay? Or there have to be adjustments made so that air can come through the nose or come through the mouth. And so that's going to make it more difficult for the child to make these adjustments. We also know that neurologically there are some differences in children with Down syndrome. And neurologically there are two areas really that we look at that can impact on intelligibility. One is oral motor skills, the ability to move the lips and the tongue and the jaw muscles and move them all in a coordinated manner and a very precise, refined manner to make specific sounds. Okay? And the nerves supply the muscles to do that. For children who have a neurological difficulty known as apraxia, okay, they have difficulty in programming those muscles. And they have to learn to make each sound individually, separately, and then to combine those sounds, the consonants with the vowels, the consonants, vowels, and consonants, the consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. So they're saying ba and bat and baba and learning to gradually expand those sounds. So for children who have the difficulty of apraxia, we have to work with them in a certain way to help them master those sounds. Now, can we work on those areas? Yes. Okay, anatomically, the orthodontist, the prosthodontist who helps make different kinds of appliances can help the child changing the form. They can use palatal expanders. There are different ways that anatomically things can be changed. Physiologically, the speech-language pathologist can help with strengthening muscles. Earlier on than that, many of the muscles that we use for speech are actually muscles used for feeding. So we don't even have to wait until the child can do muscle exercises. Okay, we can work with muscles in breastfeeding, in bottle feeding, in switching to solid foods, in chewing and teaching the child how to chew and to swallow. We can work on tasks that will help speech later on. So physiologically, there's a lot that we can do. The next thing that we look at is what the listener hears, or what we call the perceptual symptoms of speech. What does the listener hear in the child's speech? And why does this make it more difficult for the child to be easily understood? And what can we do to change that? So the first area we look at is articulation. Articulation is the motor task of making sounds. Okay, how do we make the p sound? What do we use? We use the lips, but we use the lips in a certain way. We have the lips go together and then explode a puff of air.